Again, thank you to everyone that's already joined. We're just giving it a few minutes to let everyone log on. We're just going to give it one more minute to let everyone get joined, and then we'll get started with the webinar. Thanks for joining. Okay, thank you everyone that's joined so far. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back if you joined us last week for episode 1 in our Data Governance Done Right series, and welcome if this is your first time joining us. I'm going to go ahead and just start off with a quick overview about Numentica for any of those of you who might not be familiar. We were established in 2008 with offices across the US and India with 100 plus consultants worldwide. We are a certified Informatica implementation partner with a strong focus in data governance strategy and implementation consulting, as well as a dedicated team for any managed service needs. Today, we're going to have 2 different speakers. I'm excited to have them share with us. You're going to be hearing from Sri towards the end of the presentation and Lokesh here at the beginning. I do want to mention that we are taking any questions you might have. There's a section in the Q&A where you can type in those questions. Feel free to send any in you might have. If for some reason we can't answer your question today live, we will be following up via email to make sure we get those answers to you. So again, thanks for joining for our second episode in the series. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Lokesh right now to share with you.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, based on your local time. And welcome back. We are excited to have you on the second episode of our webinar series. And today we will talk about how to get started with your data governance program. Before we dive deep into the details, I want to do a quick recap on the points we discussed in webinar 1, the ingredients for success. So we talked about defining success. What are the business drivers that define why in the very first place we want to implement a data governance program? From there, we discussed about how a good or a successful data governance program is driven by business and supported by IT. We also talked about taking an iterative approach to ensure or improve the chances of getting successful, and also keeping focus only on the critical elements and not go about trying to govern all of the data that we have in across our enterprise. Then we talked about, with the help of an example, how we should measure adoption through the lens of adoption, because our understanding of success might be different from reality. And then we talked about how a good technology solution should be embedded at point of access so that we can drive that human behavior. And finally, we wrapped up the first episode on the note that after the first iteration, we should celebrate success. And it is important because we talked about the concept of positive reinforcement. So the idea is to maintain that excitement amongst the participants of your data governance program. With that in mind, we'll start today's webinar, and the theme of this webinar will be we'll try to take an approach where we keep in mind the ingredients we talked about and then discuss the new concepts to get started with the data governance program. All right, let's have the frame set, okay? So that whatever content we discussed today, we want to have it in the right frame. So you might be in different phases or different places of your journey. Maybe you have started your data governance program and seen some success. Well, that's great. Kudos to you and congratulations. However, if you attended the first webinar, you might have seen how we perceive success might be not true, because to ensure that a program is truly successful, we have to see how well has it been adopted by the frontline consumers. So take a moment and gauge how well your adoption is. Second path could be, or in your journey, maybe you have started the program, but you're still not seeing the value that you anticipated or expected. And as we talk through the contents, maybe you can see some of the things maybe you missed out because of which your value is getting delayed, and maybe try to build on those blocks. Next is, maybe you're looking to start your data governance program, then this is the perfect episode for you, because today we will talk about everything that you need to do prior to you starting your data governance journey. And finally, maybe you're already currently implementing. So again, it's a good refresher for you to see whether prior to implementation, whatever the tasks that are necessary for success, you have done that. With that, let's introduce a new concept, and I'll give you about 5 to 7 seconds to see what comes to your mind when you see this 29.5 days. And whoever is the first to give correct answer, we will gift you a $25 Amazon card. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So 29.5 days is the amount of time the moon takes to get from a new moon phase to a full moon phase. And this transition is not correct. Moon has to pass through several phases. As it starts its orbit or the revolution, it first gets into the crescent phase. From there, it gets into the first quarter phase, and then the gibbous phase, and finally, it transitions into a moon phase. Now, in the first episode, we talked how data governance should be unique and you should think about inventing your wheel. So I had a similar thought process. When I work with customers, I want to give them a unique perspective of designing their program. And that's how I came up with this model. If you closely observe, the moon orbits or makes its revolution around a predefined orbit, the elliptical orbit, which resonates with what we talked about, the planning phase, right? So as the moon transitions across different phases, it's moving as per a particular plan. And then there is a timeline associated with that. So all of the deliverables or all of the phases, they have time associated with that, which helps us to draw this geometry of data governance. Let's take a closer look. The first phase of moon beyond new moon is crescent. And we are able to see the crescent shape when light from sun falls on moon at an angle. Now this angle, when viewed from the earth, it focuses on the illuminated moon surface. Let's try to fit this in our data governance context. We pick up a focus area or the business driver. There could be multiple business drivers as we talked about. Maybe you underwent merger and acquisition, and as part of that, you're looking to decommission certain legacy systems, or you want to enable your data analysts for self-service, essentially to promote data literacy and promote self-service analytics culture within your organization. It could be around compliance or master data initiative as well. So having that focus area is important. However, there is a question. How do we determine which focus area, or if there are competing focus areas, which focus area to pick? A good exercise to take care of this is plot a chart. Now in this chart, the size of bubble signifies the value marked against an axis which talks about the amount of effort. Ideally, we would want to pick up a focus area and give it number one priority, whichever has the largest size or the largest impact, and it takes maybe or fairly less amount of effort. So high value, low effort takes number one priority, and then we can prioritize all of our focus areas. An important thing that comes out of it is also the roadmap. We know that for a successful governance program, we need to take an iterative approach. So with this prioritized focus areas, we have a roadmap for our subsequent iterations. A deliverable in the Crescent phase is to come up with a task list. Now, what are some of the constituents of those task lists? Capture the requirements. So let's take an example out of your business drivers. Let's say we are trying to enable self-service analytics, and then we start interviewing the data analysts to conduct those meetings to see what are their pain points and challenges. Basically, capture the requirements, how we can make their life easy, or how to enhance their consumption of data. So during requirements gathering, some of the things that we can come up with or the concerns expressed could be along the lines that they have to rely on tribal knowledge. They have to ask around people who have been working on that data within that data landscape for a long time, and then ask them what is the right data set to use. And once they get the data set, and as and when they start looking at the data elements within the data set, they have to guess the meaning. What could it mean, right? They might not have a very clear idea of the business relevance, but looking at maybe the element name, they can try to see whether that's the right element for them to use for, and then hope that their guess was correct, and then attempt to use that data. And likely that data might not be correct, and they will end up starting over. So these are some of the challenges. And as we translate that into requirements, we could strive to enable those data analysts to find the right data using English language. So they can just type in customers with sensitive data or customer contact data, and they expect that they get a list of results, the list of tables in the columns, which has that customer contact result. And then understand the meaning. So having the right business labels, so that looking at the column name, they have the business glossary present there, and then they can really understand what this data element means instead of guessing it. And then they can trust the data. So an element of crowdsourcing, what other analysts in the community are saying about the data by virtue of giving it ratings or leaving the reviews. And once they have all of these insights, the business metadata, the operational metadata, the crowdsourcing, they can start trusting that data and use it for their analysis. And this drastically accelerates the discovery time, because we are not asking around for data, and then we are not wasting time working on the wrong data set. So this gives us a clear list of requirements. And then the next step we need to do is translate those requirements into deliverables. So if I have to find data using simple English language, maybe I need a Google-like search interface where I can type in my requirement and get the results. To understand the meaning, I need an integration of my business glossaries with my technical metadata. To trust, I need some features which allows me to leave reviews or to certify the assets or decertify the assets. If an asset is not good, give a half rating. If it's really good, give it a 5 rating. And then finally, use the data. And to use it, I should be able to request access to that particular data set, like a marketplace. When you go to Amazon, you look for a product, you see how the ratings and reviews are for that product, and you add that product to your cart. Similarly, after I find the right data, I should have the capability to request access to that data and add it to my cart. Then we talk about the feasibility analysis. Whatever requirements or whatever deliverables we have, Is it feasible to analysis, or do I need a technology solution to achieve some portion of my requirements? And then also think about the testability. Can I come up with the test use cases that will meet my requirements and the deliverables? So this is the phase one, and these are all of the activities and considerations that we make in phase one. Once we have done this, once we have the focus area and the clear requirements and deliverables, we can transition into phase two, which is the quarter phase of Moon. In this phase, the projection from Moon and Sun, they meet at right angles on Earth. So the focus here is on right. And in terms of data governance, we strive to get the right alignment of business, IT, and technology. Now, you may choose to call this as people, process, and technology. The idea is the same, to have adequate representation from IT, adequate representation from business and the ownership, and also make sure we choose the right technology solution from the correct vendor. What are some of the things or activities that we can perform in phase two? Number one is governance map. So we define what my business driver is, we define our challenges, and we also define the technology landscape. And then we kind of start mapping all of these things together. And we'll talk more about this in a second. Second is about communication strategy. So again, one of the top ingredients for success is to make sure we have enough business sponsorship. But how do we do that? We need a strategy for that. We'll talk about the communication strategy in this phase. And then finally, I think you might have guessed it because we talked about it. And then the image that you see should help you to guess it. What is the third activity we do in quarter phase? That's right, metrics, the requirement traceability metrics. These are the components we discuss in the phase two as we start our governance journey. Number one, governance map. So let me quickly again revise the business drivers for our governance program. M&As. So we could onboard new systems which are legacy and we want to decommission that. It could cause duplicate data and we want to terminate that, or maybe we want to retain that, but we have to devise strategies for that. Or maybe additional data domains are onboarded and we want to train our existing people on that new data. We want to accelerate that learning cycle. Next could be master data, where we want to eliminate the silos and have golden records or the master data for our different domains. And then regulation and compliance, we want to make sure the adherence to policies is intact, and then also consider the data privacy and security aspects. Another driver could be advanced analytics, where we enable self-service analytics, ensure the quality of data and the trust in data is high. So these are some of the business drivers. Now let's see what is the technology or the solution landscape. How does it look like? A system inventory is a collection of systems. So you might have, say, a data warehouse system, or you might have, say, cloud system, AWS, Azure, or GCP, or any other provider. Then we have data lineage, which shows the journey of data right from the point of inception to consumption, how it proliferates as it hops and as it grows with time. The data request workflow. So once I have found the data I need, how do I request access to it? What are the different levels of approvals that are required? Reference data. So in regulated industries, we have a lot of codes, right? So maybe tax or healthcare industry, there are so many codes. And we want to make sure the translation of those codes is good as we store data in our data warehouse. And when we say good, it means high quality. Then the data quality is around different dimensions. So how complete, accurate, or timely, or the timeliness aspect of data. The business glossaries are super important because they give us the business labels or the business context as in a day of a data analyst as he works or as he or she works to find that data. Having that right business context is important to accelerate the discovery. Data catalog, a centralized repository of all of the data assets across your enterprise, enriched with business metadata, operational metadata. And then data privacy and policies. What are some of the policies if you are in a regulated industry? Or what are some of the best practices for critical elements that you want your data consumers or data collectors should adhere to. So these are some of the solutions in the technology landscape. And then from there, we talk about the challenges. So your challenge could be your users don't know where the data is located or how is it used. So a mapping, when we do mapping, a good answer for that could be we need a system inventory and a data lineage. Inventory will tell us where the data is, and data lineage will tell me how is it used. So for example, if you get audited and the auditor asks you, you have this sensitive data, how do you manage access or how do you secure that data? You can use the data lineage as the reference artifact to say these are the systems where this data is, this is how it moves across different systems, and these are the controls and access provisions that we have implemented to secure the data. Another example could be data is not readily available to consumers. Could be because it is sensitive data, and then there are privacy implications. There are certain policies that govern that data. And then maybe you need a data catalog to see the classification of data, sensitive versus non-sensitive data, and then see what are the policies regulating it. Should I have access to that data? And if yes, then the capability to request access to that data. Similarly, there could be other challenges, and then you can map it to the solution landscape. And this gives us an important deliverable, the requirement traceability matrix. We know the challenge and we know the solution. And as we select the technology or as we start our discussion with vendors, we know what exactly are we looking for, and that will help you to choose the right solution. Moving on to communication strategy. So governance will have representation from business as well as from IT and from other departments as well. So again, in regulations, you might want to interact with the legal teams or the info security teams. So we want to make sure everybody is on the same page and everybody is involved as we are working on the governance program. What are some of the communication strategies that we can use? Number one is brand your program. And this is specifically important if you have tried data governance in past, but have not seen success. And when you try to start over again, and the moment you go to the senior leadership, they might not have a very positive feeling about this because this is something tried and didn't provide much value. So you need to be very creative around this and brand your program accordingly. It should be inspired from business driver. So if you are working to come up with a new website with the new product offerings, you brand it accordingly. It should be appealing so that it creates that excitement, and it should be inclusive because governance transcends business areas and subject areas, and we want to make sure we get input from everyone and everybody is involved and everybody has an interest in what we are trying to implement. So brand it. Next is around operating model. And we briefly talked about it in our first episode, how the scale of your business or the other factors like geography determine what operating model might be good for your needs. So a centralized model where there is a single body governing the overall initiatives of your program versus a decentralized model where you have local heads for maybe each business and subject areas. It totally depends on your need. Again, it's unique to you. It's important to consider what operating model suits you the best. And then finally, the data governance charter. On the earlier slide, we talked about the focus area, we talked about our business drivers, we talked about the challenges, and we also talked about the potential solution. All of these are key components of a data governance charter. So charter is a very good way to communicate with the senior leadership because it has all the details, how it is going to help them. So spend some time on the charter, include that in your strategy. And then finally, come up with a list of stakeholders from business as well as from IT and from other supporting functions as well. For example, the legal, and then have adequate representation so that everybody understands, number one, obviously. And then second, once they give their inputs, they are excited to see how it turns out. And then that facilitates communication. So this is an important aspect as well. So in the first episode, we talked about two components that are often overlooked and could lead to or be a recipe for failure: the consensus and the governance. So just enough consensus and just enough governance are the two aspects we talked about. In planning, we don't want to spend a lot of time to make sure everybody is on board with what we are trying to do. We just need enough consensus and focus on the parts that we have underlined here. Opposing parties agreeing on a statement, even if barely. Now, something very useful can happen in this phase, especially when you are trying to do something new. There will be politics because there will be representations from different departments and they will have their own views, which might or might not be the same. And then it is your responsibility to overcome that politics by having just enough consensus. But how do you achieve that? That's the big question. So let's take a look at some of the ways. Relevance to leadership priorities. Having a good understanding of what our senior leaders are trying to do or how our program can help the bigger picture, maybe to avoid cost or to reduce cost or to generate new revenue streams. We have to clearly drive home the point how our efforts can solve their challenges. What's in it for me? Executives always respond to facts and figures. So the more we can quantify our efforts, the better it is, and more easy or easier it becomes to communicate with the leadership. And maybe we can also talk about horror stories, how some people in the same industry failed to do certain thing because of which they had to face so and so impact. We can always reference that. And then create excitement. This is the branding part where we can create excitement by virtue of inclusivity, by asking people what they have to say, and then giving them an opportunity to contribute to a larger initiative or to make a greater impact. We can create that excitement. And then in terms of the communication with senior leadership, we can talk about the risk of not participating, the FOMO, fear of missing out, and then some of the possible business outcomes that can help the overall strategic initiatives that will create an excitement within the leadership team. And then the most important part is do your homework. You might do a fantastic job again to do all of the things right, but if you're not prepared to answer questions from the C-suite, uh, it might not go the way you have expected. So these are some of the things that we can consider as we plan our communication strategies. So far, we discussed about the focus area. So we know why we are implementing a data governance program. We got the requirements and we got the deliverables. And we also got people to say yes to get that consensus. This introduces the third vertex of the getting started triangle, and that is the technology. For a good governance program, there are a few things that can be done, maybe using very simple things, more about culture or more about communication, like keeping people informed. But to achieve certain level of automation or to make that sustainable change in the culture, we need technology. And what are some of the good aspects or what are some of the things a good technology solution should have? It should act as guardrails. So we talked about how people or how the consumers struggle to get data. They have to reach out to so many people, go through so many approval cycles before they can find the data. A good solution should act as guardrail. For a particular data domain, for example, we can maintain a repository of who should have access to the data or which department should have access to the data, and then what are the policies, and then the users consuming that data should maybe accept that policy. All of this being embedded at the point of governance. And then this solution should also allow you to create templates. Remember, we are taking an iterative approach. And then once we have learned something, We want to apply it. We don't want to recreate it. So a good solution gives us the capability to create those templates, which we can reuse as we start scaling up. The AI and ML augmentation. This is the buzzword. Everybody wants to leverage the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So let's talk a little bit about how AI and ML can be used within the data governance program. Now imagine you have data sets, that is the tables, and you have columns. And mostly in the physical layer, they will have not so business friendly names, right? So like customer number could be CNBR, or pharmacy claims data could be PCLMS, something like that. Um, and then for the consumers, to make it easy, we want to have that business glossary association. But imagine the amount of time and effort it will take to do that manually. That is where we want to leverage AI. So the solution should be smart enough to see that name sequence alignment. So for example, C underscore NBR and the business glossary is customer number. It should, with a fair amount of accuracy, should make that inference or prediction and then present to us as a result. And then I, as a business steward or a technical steward, can make the decision whether this inference is correct or wrong. So that is one way in which we can leverage artificial intelligence. Talking about machine learning, so as we categorize our data, so for example, we are categorizing PII data and PHI data, zip codes, for example. Now, zip codes is alphanumeric in some countries. In some countries, it is just numeric or a string. And then there could be multiple data domains which have that pattern, right? So employee number, for example, is is a six-digit number. A zip code is a six-digit number, for example. And when we do the data classification, both of them can be tagged as, say, employee number. Now, a good solution should learn from the first curation cycle. If I accept or reject a certain inference, in the subsequent iterations, it should be able to learn and reduce those false positives. So that is one way of how we could envision machine learning contributing to our governance and cataloging capabilities. Crowdsourcing. So we kind of talked about it, the Amazon-like experience, or let's say if you go to a new city and then you want to find a good restaurant for your dinner, you open up Yelp and see what are the restaurants in 2 miles radius, and you can filter by the cuisine or filter by reviews and ratings, and then you go for say maybe continental with 4.5 ratings and above with minimum 100 good reviews. So what others say about an entity is super powerful, and that is what we want to replicate in our governance initiatives as well, so that a new analyst, or any analyst for that matter, can see what his peers in the community, his or her peers in the community are saying about that, and then he or she can take an informed decision whether or not to use that data set. And finally, learn and expand. Again, it's an iterative effort. So we want to make sure the technology solution, whatever we choose, gives us a platform to start small and scale big, and not expect us to implement tons of things right away, because we we discussed in the first webinar that we take baby steps and we start small. So these are some of the aspects that we should consider when deciding on technology. Now, with all the deliverables of phase 2, we reach phase 3, that is the Gibbous. Now, Gibbous has its origin in Latin now, which means hump. This is the final hump that we need to cross before we start our journey, the implementation journey or the road to utopia. Cross the hump and prepare for your implementation. So this is like a roadmap. And then at this point, we have established that business and IT representation both are equally important. And we need to make sure that both of these representations take efforts in parallel or progress in parallel. So for example, on the business side, we can kick off a business workshop where participants from the DG office come together and talk about the use cases, prioritize the use cases. Um, and maybe when we are starting with, for example, in a healthcare, or we are starting with maybe just the claims data, or maybe just with the pharmacy data. So decisions of that kind. And on the technology side, we can start our discussion. Hopefully, by this point, we would have finalized which vendor to go with. And then we kickstart the discussion around how does the architecture look like? What is the sizing in terms of your CPU, RAM, storage? Start getting those details. Then in parallel, again on the business side, we start defining our artifacts. So what are the business glossaries that we need to go in the first iteration after we have selected the domain? Who will be the business owner and the business steward, as well as the technical owner and the technical steward? So have that accountability and artifacts ready so that when the time comes for us to implement that, we don't have to wait for a couple of weeks or a couple of months for these things to get ready, because we have seen in our implementation, businesses sitting on their investment for substantial amount of time because the groundwork was not ready. Again, on the technical side, we can keep progressing. We can have those recurring meetings as we procure our hardware, the license to install, and the software binaries to install. And if it is a SaaS offering, we can think about our access to, or how do we get that SaaS, maybe the subscription. I mean, start or plan things, if it's need an on-prem installation, or if it needs a cloud installation, have those things going. And then an important aspect here is getting approvals in place. So info security approvals and data access approvals. We have seen this so many times that we are ready with the install, the product is ready to be used, and we want to start our cataloging. But we find out that we don't have access. We don't have the connectivity details. So we start the approval chain, and then the DBAs, they reject the request that this is production data, it is sensitive, we cannot give any application access to the production systems. These are some of the things that we need to take into account before we get there. So have all the approvals. And again, this is where the charter and the representation from IT and business and other departments comes in handy, because the leadership is aware of what we are trying to do. So having those approvals will make it easier for us. Once we have all the approvals in place, once we have the hardware, the software, the licenses, once we have the right architecture, once we have all the artifacts developed, that is where we can start working on setting up that environment and installing our products that we need to implement our data governance program. And that brings us to the end of the third and final phase of your beginning of your governance program. And everything beyond this is the utopia, the ideal governance implementation that we will be talking about in the fourth episode. Now, before we start taking questions, I just want to quickly remind you of episode 3 that we will be having on April 15th, same time, and we hope to see you all there. That's it in terms of the content. And now over to Shri to see if we have any questions from the attendees.
All right, thanks, Lokesh. You guys are able to hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful, thank you. One thing is we are waiting on the questions. Most of the questions which we had from the first part of the webinar were answered. There were 2 or 3 questions which were left out as we were a little trouble getting all of them. We are going to address those, at least 2 or 3, which I saw an email this morning. I will we'll go and address those questions as well. If your questions were not addressed, please bear with us. We did address most of them from the last part. All right. Okay, all right. There's one. Let me open that one second, 2 ones. Okay, all right. So this, if I understand this well, okay. What is the impact of AI on the data governance implementation? All right. Okay. This. Okay. Let me think a little bit. Impact of AI. I believe this is coming from one of our slides, the AI ML augmentation. So I'm going to explain this from a cataloging perspective, because catalog is a significant part of the data governance framework itself. One of the things which we do during cataloging is we scan all the assets within the enterprise. We catalog those assets, and then we try to classify them into some meaningful buckets, be it for regulatory compliance like PI, PCI, PHI type of data. So all these classification are based on data patterns. So either a technology in place is either helping you to do that, or as a data steward, you're able to go and enrich the data, say that I'm going to classify this piece of data as a PII data or PCI, PHI, whatever that compliance is looking for. So either the technology should be able to help you out as you classify them and you enrich them. It should take from your the user behavior, basically your input, and it should be able to propagate across your other scanned assets across your enterprise, and should be able to identify those data patterns and able to classify that. So that's sort of an intelligence built into the solution. And the other thing is, if you're going to certify or decertify an asset, or you're going to reject some classification based on some data patterns which you have found, the technology in place should be able to help in also identifying other assets within your scanned the catalog, and should be able to reject them as well. So it reduces the reoccurrence of those not meaningful assets or the data patterns which is not really required for that particular purpose. So it's more technology oriented, and it plays a significant part in catalog as well. All right, let me go and look. Okay, I got only one more question. If you guys type more questions, we can answer as well. So the second question which I have here is, does data lineage help with data privacy remediation? Okay, data privacy. Okay, I believe the ask here is. I see. All right. So the data lineage does definitely help, because if you're able to derive the lineage from your cataloged asset, it does help with the data proliferation perspective. You know where the journey of the data from source all the way to the target with some staging areas. Definitely the proliferation of data across multiple systems, lineage will definitely help you to identify those systems across. And but not only the lineage is going to affect, there are other things which we may need to consider is, have you classified these assets into some meaningful domains based on your sensitive data like PHI or PCI. Not only you're classifying it, but also building some security policies on top of this classification, which can really help you with the security policy violations, where you may be able to use the violations to remediate those violations as well, with some sort of a technology in place, masking or encrypting also. Yes, definitely data lineage is an integral part which can really help you with remediation because it does help you with data proliferation as well. I have only 2 questions so far. If you guys have any other questions, if we can type them, we can answer that as well. So any questions which was not answered in the previous one, we will address that as well. All right. So I don't see anything else coming in, Alex.
Looks like we might have just got one. How this might be able to help with data privacy needs around CCPA or GDPR.
All right. Okay. So can this help with data privacy needs around? Yes, definitely. So the data, it all depends on the data governance solution which is put into place. A combination of technology can definitely help with the data privacy needs. What you're really doing there in your entire process is either you're cataloging your assets and you're classifying those assets into meaningful buckets, not only from your resource metadata perspective, but also from the data perspective. You're classifying them. So once you're classifying, you have those list of objects which fall into that category. So, and also these assets, because of your profiling the data and you're classifying them, you know the sensitive data and the data proliferation, which I explained for the previous question, will definitely help you to remediate that. So it does help. So the classification of CCP or GDPR is based on some rules. We derive those rules from those regulation, build policies on top of it, and the policies can help you to define those rules with any technology which you choose. And that's the rule you're going to put against your scanned assets across your enterprise. And that classification will definitely help you to address your data privacy needs as well. Remediating the remediation is a list of tasks based on what type of resource. You may do some sort of a data masking, or you may need some encryption if it is going to be a file-based data as well. So the one other aspect is, this question is a little more interesting. The technology what you put in place also should be very significant if it can give you that reporting capabilities as well, at least a place where you can really go and search your assets, and you look at what data or what assets being affected by these policy or regulation. So there should be either a report or a tool which should help you out. So since we have been working a lot with Informatica product suite, we have looked into tools like Axon, Enterprise Data Catalog, data privacy management, and data quality played a significant role in helping us out there. And Axon interface has helped us out at least to create some reports which can help with that as well.
Looks like that's all we have right now. Did we get those questions from last week answered, or should we go to those? Sri, I do have one about how to help with the burden of standing up your data governance program, the burden specifically on the business as they're dealing with changes in new tools or new way of thinking. I know we covered some of this in the webinar and some of the last one as well, but is there anything else we could add into that question?
Can you repeat the first part of the question, Alex?
Sure, of course. It's how to lessen the initial burden of standing up a data governance program on the business. The examples they give, with the changes and new tools and this new way of thinking.
All right. So the challenge is we start a process tool agnostic. We do not go in with a specific tool in mind. We go with specific requirements in mind, and once we classify them and we are able to look internally with the stakeholders, and not necessarily associating with that with business folks. One thing which really helped us in the past is IT is an integral part of the implementation, right? Most of the time, what I've seen with is IT has some sort of, especially at least from the cataloging perspective, they already have a solution in place. Already they've cataloged something. They are familiar with their systems in place. So that, and they would have seen challenges with provisioning this data to business stakeholders, be it for reporting or for compliance perspective. So there's some ground up work which is already done in that space. So that may be a good place to start with, to look at those use cases where the business, the request from business was a challenge to provision or implement. So I would take all those use cases. That's where the requirements were missing. So I would take those as a first step in the process, construct the initial phase for your requirements phase, and start building that framework. You need to start somewhere. It should be based on a use case. I've seen, this is one good example with one of the customers which we worked with, how do we really start? So we went with what use cases you have, what are you really trying to solve here, and will data governance framework, I mean, even implementing a data will it help you to address this? So it may not be a full-fledged implementation of a framework, but it may start with a small use case. A good use case is a reporting need, and that really starts your process. When someone is really looking for something for a report, and if they are not able to find it, that means there's a missing link.
Perfect. Well, that's time. Thank you, Sri, for addressing those questions, and Lokesh for the information. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. I hope you'll be able to join us in a few weeks on April 15th at the same time for the 3rd episode in the series. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you.